Hi everyone, welcome to today's installment of 100 in 100, number 85, carrying on swiftly through the construction part of the development life cycle, and following on really from yesterday's episode where we touched on traditional construction methods. Today we want to move things on and talk about other ways of constructing buildings that aren't that don't fall into the traditional bracket. And these are modern methods of construction, MMC. You may have seen referenced, may have seen spoken about, certainly gathering more traction and is talked about a lot more over the last few years. Obviously, construction is an industry like any other industry where people are always continuing to innovate and look at ways of new ways of doing things and how to improve. And quite often people are coming up with different systems of building houses or constructing buildings. And we want to just discuss some of the modern methods, look at their strengths, look at their kind of weaknesses, benefits. Now, just to clear things up, I think one of the main ways of modern method of construction is modular construction. But I do want to stress that is not the only method of MMC. It's often talked about like it is the only method of MMC, volumetric construction, i.e. often built in a factory, modular, either in one or multiple sections, and then delivered to site and popped onto the foundations and bolted together. And obviously that does represent one of the popular methods within MMC, or certainly one of the most talked about. But there are other methods that we want to bring to your attention and just go into some details of. Now, really, you've got a couple of different ways of looking at it. Really, from modern methods of construction can be pretty much divided into the two sections. It's off-site construction and on-site construction, because typically people may feel that modern methods are built in a factory and then delivered on site, as I mentioned with modular. But actually, there are some modern methods that are still just on site. All the component parts are delivered to site, and it's formed on site, much as a traditional build would be. And a good example of that is insulated concrete forms. So you may have seen things like that on grand designs, programs of that nature. Typically, you see a lot more modern methods televised and publicised on one-off builds, and an ICF is a version of that. It's basically where you've got your insulated blocks and you fill concrete into those blocks that are reinforced with steel, and it's pumped in, and then you remove sometimes you remove the outside shuttering, but the ICF is insulated, so you leave the insulation in, and then you finish the outside with whatever covering. You often see, as I said, you see them on one-off builds quite a bit, and in certain situations you don't really see that kind of stuff on volume sites or multiple dwellings. So that's just one example of a modern method that is delivered on, actual on-site construction. But the off-site construction, really, we're looking again at subdividing that into what we would call volumetric, so 3D effectively. So modular falls into that category, and then 2D panelized and prefabricated construction, where you're getting a lot of panels that are put together, things like SIPs and CLT. So there's that, and then there's also light steel gauge as well, so bringing in steel into the mix as well. So Richard's going to discuss his thoughts, and then I'm going to weigh in where I can.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks, Bryn. Yeah, so yeah, there is a lot of confusion, and Bryn's already explained the whole modular thing. But if we just sort of put a little bit more meat on the bones as well to volumetric, whereas Bryn said that the ultimate volumetric is fully modular, where the units arrive and they are all the internal and external finishes and the services are all installed, and they just bolt them together, as Bryn said. That's fully modular, and you know, yeah, that mostly commercial at the moment. In terms of the use there, but also volumetric is a basic structure, so it just could be, you know, some of the sides and the roof and the floor or something around. They come together and they're bolted together, and there's a lot more finishing done on site. So volumetric, so as been said, basically delivering boxes to a lesser or greater extent finished. Much more used really is the panelized systems. So as Bryn said, SIPS panels have been around. Well, I can remember SIPS panels, and I've been doing this 40 odd years, back in the early days, and I think there's an element they were always going to be the solution, you know, to a lot of things, and unfortunately they probably never really took off as much as people would, and even back to the same two problems really, was trust, people not trusting things that were new, and particularly the funders. You wouldn't be able to get a mortgage on it. You can now. I wouldn't say it's still easy, but it's easier. So SIPS panels, and CLT, so cross laminated timber. We quite like those, although we've not actually used them as yet. And so some of these panelized systems, they'll come in either what we would call an open panel or a closed panel. So an open panel, generally it's got one face to it and the framework, and then on site the other panel plus all the insides like insulation possibly get put in. Now there are slight variations on that, whereas a closed panel can virtually be a pre-finished panel. So it can be, you know, a panel off of a fully modular unit with the facing slip bricks on, or a rendered type finish panels, not rendered obviously, but a rendered finish, you know, zinc finishes, all sorts of finishes, and on the inside the plasterboard's there and things. So so panelized is very much, you know, again, it can be relatively basic, or it can be not fully finished but very finished. So I think one of the issues we've got, there are so many types here, and there are so many people, so many companies, smaller and medium-sized companies, that are producing different systems, and they're all brilliant in their own way. You know, they are all, I mean, they're you know, ultimately what are they looking to do? They're, I suppose from my point of view, reduce the time. I think, and that's sort of, you know, reduced costs is one that is, you know, again, I'm going to be honest and sort of say I haven't really seen much evidence as reduced costs, not in a finished build. You know, yes, on paper, because it's quicker and there's, you know, potentially lower interest payments, reduced prelims, for instance, you know. But I think that the two of the important things which I think are very important is improved build quality. I'll let Bryn talk a little bit about that in a minute though, and probably de-skilling, so that we aren't going to be relying on all the skills, because some of this stuff can be done, yeah, in factories, etc. You know, so more of the closed panels, so the more pre-finished panels that just thing, and the more fully modular, you know, then the more stuff we get out of the wind and the rain and the elements, then in theory we get a better build quality, do we, Ren?
In theory, yeah, I think it is the key thing there. Possibly, but also possibly not. And I think I want to just to kind of illustrate that point is bring your attention to other industries, other products that are made in factories. Just because we're talking about houses effectively that are made in factories, the kind of the feeling with it all, certainly social media and out in the kind of out on various forms of media, is that because it's built in a factory, the quality control is going to be so much better than something equivalent that is built on site. But ultimately, just because something's built in a factory doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be perfect. You know, that think to some of the products that you've got, that you've ordered previously, whether computers, electronics, it could even be furniture, whatever that may be, that built in a factory or a warehouse and then delivered to you, and you've got faults with it. One of the difficulties and one of the kind of pieces of the puzzle really to work out once these units get shipped to site is that if there are problems that have arisen in the factory, for example, if we're dealing with closed panel systems, or we're dealing with fully modular systems, are we aware, even if there are service panels and hatches and things like that, that we can get to some of the main parts? How do we then test and identify where some of the issues and the problems may be that may have come up during the production? So it's a really interesting one. The tendency is, or the misconception is, that just because it's built in a factory, it means it's going to be absolute quality, and just want to challenge that it's not always the case. As we said yesterday on the traditional construction, it really is about it is about that management. It's management of. I always used to say, is a clean site is a safe site. And when you're dealing in clean and safe surroundings, then generally your workmanship is generally better. And in a factory, they're trying to say that those kind of things are more controllable. But ultimately, it's still, there's obviously going to be innovations in terms of robotics, and there's probably going to be combinations of that and AI and all these things to come, no doubt. But ultimately, it's still run by humans. Human error is always liable, whether you're in a factory or whether you're on site. So it's about effective management as much as it is, how or where it's built, rather.
Just an example of that close to home really is we have a truck, which we still have, that was built in a factory to a degree by robots, that had a problem with it, and they were about to write it off because it was something to do with electrics. No, was it something to do with electrics or whatever? And in the end, they found it by taking it all apart, etc. So I think this is what we're, it is not it's not utopia, all these factory stuff, because we constantly have stuff that is, appliances. There ain't anybody that watches this that hasn't had a big problem with something that is produced in a factory. But what I want to do, and this is not a downer about modern methods of construction, because some of them are really good, but what never seems to happen is we stick with the same things. You can't get mortgages on them, and actually that is still true to a degree. So we'd always sort of check out, if you're looking at using a more modern method of construction, check out some basic stuff on the CML, the Council of Mortgage Lenders website. It talks about there, and there will be mortgage providers that say they will accept SIPS panels and CLT and all that, but actually what you want to do is talk to either directly that mortgage provider or through a broker to say, have you actually lent on it, and what were the terms, and were they different than something that's on a standard build? And one thing we would say is if something's got a lot of timber in it, then it's got a better chance of getting a mortgage or exit finance if you're holding them to thing, than if it hasn't. So either, because a lot of timber, certainly timber frame, they're not considered standard unless you're in Scotland, when 75% or so of their new properties are built in timber frame, and it's considered standard construction up there, obviously to do with weather and things like that. There are still finance issues about some of the MMCs, and I think one of the other things I'd like to point out, really, two other things, sorry, I'll point out, is right where we are now is there's concern over the supply chain, over, I don't know, the size of the companies that are producing them, their capacity, the quality, as we've already just touched on. Are they going to be able to deliver high volumes? A high volume to us or to you might be 20 units, but if they're only producing 100 units a year, then that's a big percentage of their output. So if they have any problems, you know, whatever problems they might have, labor problems, or I don't know, have a fire at the factory or whatever, it's completely gone. There isn't a backup. Yeah. So just to give you an idea of output, L&G, Legal and General, probably the first bigger producer to sort of thing, and they've been, don't know how long they've been building their factory, Bryn, but they are producing stuff now. It is or will be, no, it is at the moment the largest manufacturing facility. This is fully modular. Yeah, it's not panelized systems, it's fully modular in Europe. Yeah, they will have a capacity, is it 3,000 or 3,500 homes a year, I think. Yeah, currently.
I think if I'm right, it might be slightly wrong, but if I remember rightly, I think the 3,500 was 3,500 units, but one house isn't made up of one unit; it's made up of two.
I think ultimately they are still on target to produce 3,500 homes, which you say could be 2 or 4 units. But this year they're on target now. Up until about 2 months ago, they'd produced 150 in the calendar year so far, but they are on target to produce 350. And they have got an advanced system. So I just want to sort of say this is if you want to start going down a fully modular route, you're going to be very, very restricted to where you can buy them from. So this is a concern. It's about the supply chain. It's about tying in, you know. And the other thing is I guess we call it early design freeze. So, you know, there are very, very little opportunities to make any changes on site. I mean, I appreciate people sort of say, well, you shouldn't have to make changes on site, and we don't encourage it. However, I think with the ability, once you've ordered effectively the unit, you can't change anything. And there is also in and around that is from a design point of view, there's a concern that we're going to have even more standardization than people currently moan about. When they talk about your volume house builders, they only build the same boxes. Well, actually, to actually get the price down on modular and to a degree on some panelized systems is, well, they've got to standardize it, otherwise they can't get the price down. So, you know, there are all sorts of issues, but on the plus side, I think it's going to help de-skill and certainly should improve build quality, but it's not going to iron out problems.
I think it's really interesting on the design side as well, in respect of, you know, what issues will that then impact on things like planning permission. You know, if you're dealing with sites, at what point have you got to commit in terms of orders and make sure that they've got enough capacity to deliver X number of units? Have you got to do that pre-planning permission? Have you then got to obviously submit your detailed planning with plans, you know, that are the modular plans? And obviously you've got the lead time there. So there's a lot of kind of question marks and issues and hurdles to overcome with regards to that. But as Richard said, you know, this isn't we are against modern methods of modular construction and all that kind of stuff. It's just about raising some of the issues at this point in time. No doubt in a few, you know, once it picks up more traction, the key is obviously, and the conundrum is that once you operate at scale, then costs can come down. Once costs can come down, there'll be more competition in terms of manufacturers. And then you do as a buyer, you do see the benefit of those reductions in cost. Certainly, if you're de-skilling, as Richard's saying, then potentially you are bringing some of that labour costs down. So it's all about, once it picks up traction and the companies get to a point where they've proven the concept, then you will start to see reductions in cost, and then it might be a bit more of a level playing field when it comes to comparing that against more traditional methods, or certainly dipping your toe in the water. I think one of the interesting things as well, just to pick up on what Richard said, is that obviously terms when it comes to finance, because the rebuttal from all the manufacturers and all the salesmen and anybody sort of, you know, interested in modern methods of construction is, yes, it's BOPAS, it's registered with BOPAS, and it's got that rating, and it's so and so will lend on it. Here's 25 mortgage lenders that said they're going to lend on it, but Richard mentioned the terms, and this is really important, because if you're Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, then and you're then going for a mortgage application, and you've got a house A, which is traditional construction, that you can get a standard mortgage from one of the mainstream banks at a relatively low percent over 35 years or 30 years or whatever, versus a factory built property of the same size. It might look a bit different, might be a bit nicer, the quality might be a bit better, who knows, but you're only able to access a handful of lenders, and your mortgage rate is going to be, you know, more than that of a traditional build. Then what decision are you going to make? Are you going to go for the traditional that offers you what it needs to do, and it's more affordable, or are you going to go for the one that was built in a factory, for example? So they're the things to consider. You know, it's not about our opinion, it is about the opinion of the people that matter ultimately, because you can have paper profit, but if nobody buys your units, and the profit stays on paper, and then it slowly gets eroded. So they're the important things to really focus on. But we were discussing before pressing go on this video, and Richard mentioned about some numbers with regards to the output, or recent numbers with regards to output that we've found, researched, in terms of construction methods as a makeup of housing delivery. So from where we found it, 80% of new build housing is masonry, 15% timber frame, and 5% is a collection of all the rest, should we say, the other methods. So it just gives you a snapshot of where the industry is at with regards to different ways of constructing buildings. So that's a bit of an insight into MMC. No doubt, you know, it will be cause for good debate and good discussions on subsequent videos and interactions on our Facebook page or YouTube, or wherever you're watching this. And no doubt we will see you know, innovations you know, going forward.
Yeah, so I think so reiterate what Brent said. We are fans of MMC, if you like. We've been trying to embrace it for 44 years. I've been doing this, but what we should look at, I think, is you know, taking forward some of the innovations in components. So if we are reducing the amount of components that are delivered to site, but so things like, you know, bathroom pods, yeah, I'm not convinced about those, but they are being used to a degree. Door sets, which is a fairly straightforward one, where the door comes, it's pre-hung in the lining and everything's there. That cuts down a lot of stuff, and it's quite minimal, but that's actually, you know, an innovation. It's been around a few years now, but it's still not widely used, but it is getting to be more widely used, and it is a better product, and to an extent it I wouldn't say it saves money, but it saves time, certainly. Things like prefabricated chimneys, people have seen them being lifted up on the top. They're generally false chimneys, albeit, but they're prefabricated. You can't tell from the floor. Something we call I-beams, which is a timber saving floor joist, or a structural beam, and they haven't got too much timber in them, if you like. They've got a lot less, and they're great. The services go through they've got a bit of metal in them generally for the support, but that's relatively, well, it's been around a few years, but we're still not fully embracing that. I don't know, porches, canopies. So some of the stuff that is built off site, and another one really for some projects is precast foundations, which normally will sit on a pile or something like that, and they'll generally be excuse me, precast concrete, and they'll come on, and the foundation, the piles are in, they'll come on, lift on, and away we go. So we are already, the industry, even the masonry industry, the traditional build, is already embracing modern methods of components anyway, you're putting components together. And I think that we have to be generally forced into things. But I think what we've got coming up, and it's something that's called a future home standard. And in there is a promise, if you like, that we will. One of the things they're going to get rid of is gas boilers by the end of 2025, or by 2025, in fact. And we're going to get net zero carbon by 2050. Now, these are commitments. I know they could move, but we will only achieve much better standards if we do adopt more off-site manufacture. And whether that is panelized systems, closed panels, whether it's fully modular, I don't know. What I would say is, at the moment, the industry is too fragmented. Huge research and development startup costs for these companies, and when they've got their product, that they've got to go out and sell it. So some of the stuff we get out there is marketing. Hopefully we've given you a bit more of a balanced view, but it is possible. So I think I'm not whether they are the highest, but one of the highest, certainly in Europe, the highest producers of off-site manufacture. And this is not all fully modular either, but there is quite a lot of modular, but certainly closed panel systems in Sweden, and they're producing almost half of their new homes off-site. And again, it's climate, because they have even worse weather issues than we do for producing on-site stuff. But China have been quite a leader in fully modular in terms of the design and the manufacturer. They got a target of something like 30% of all their homes to be, or all their new homes to be, off-site manufacturer. So a modern method of construction, again, not fully modular, but panelized systems and things like that, and all sorts of printed homes. That's a bit further down. But by 2026, they're still only targeting 30%. So we have to, in this country, take on board that we are not going to be adopting MMCs, and it's not going to suddenly be 80% of all of our new homes are going to be produced by MMC in the next decade. No chance. It doesn't work that quickly. But what we should be doing is, when it's appropriate, look at what's around, and if it fits the project and the exit, then embrace what modern methods you can use, whether that's modern methods of building the whole thing, or whether it's just modern methods using some of the components to cut out some of the issues that we get on site.
I think it's a really good way to end this video, really, is linking it back to a thing that was mentioned yesterday in respect of that you've always got to look to innovate. You've always got to look to build better than you did before. So, just because you might be, using traditional construction methods as opposed to MMC doesn't necessarily mean that you just crack on. You need to look at other ways of innovating, and we said yesterday a hybrid between the two in some form is often the way to go, and it's often and it's probably the way that the industry as a whole is going to move forward. So it's not necessarily fully full homes that are constructed by modern methods of construction. It might be 20% of the home would have been constructed in a factory or a different than it was traditionally, if you like, and then that might then increase, and then you may see a bit of a swing over the medium term. But as Richard said, it's certainly not going to be short term. But so we would sort of say, our personal stance is very much 2 feet in the traditional construction method camp. But occasionally going outside of that and looking at ways that we can innovate and add to the way that we do things to stay current and to improve and build better homes. So hopefully, as Richard said, we give you a bit of a balanced view and understanding about some of the other methods. And ultimately, it's about choosing the right one for you, the right one for your end buyers, your right one for the finances, and the right one for the site and the situation. So join us again for another video, 100 and 100, and we'll look forward to sharing some more with you next time. So thanks very much.